today's news poll, with the government still down 45-55 in two-party preferred terms, the coalition's primary vote stuck at 35%. And as you heard him then, Anthony Albanese finally drawing level with Scott Morrison as preferred PM. It shows just how hard this election will be for the coalition, the government, to win. Hard but not impossible, because only the politically naive would write Scott Morrison off. And it's way too early to do that anyway, particularly when it's a two-horse race, the PM versus opposition leader. And while the PM's got a bit of lead in his saddlebags, the punters aren't actually cheering on the other runner. So while the polls aren't great, they still show that even though people are cranky with Mr Morrison, they haven't locked in behind Labor's alternative. But there's still a hesitation factor about Mr Albanese, giving wise heads in the coalition some hope that if they lift their game, they still might win them back. But they better get a wriggle on, because while there's time, they don't have a lot of it. In big picture campaign terms, any further deterioration in the global strategic situation will likely help the Morrison government, because that's been an area of real achievement, because most voters rate the coalition more highly managing the economy and keeping the country safe than Labor. And the Prime Minister himself has proven to be an indefatigable campaigner, especially when compared with his immediate predecessor, but only when Scott Morrison's on his game. Not when he's doing stuff like this, washing women's hair, which frankly, I regarded as pretty creepy. Or this, sweeping a basketball court. After all, we elect leaders to lead. And after a brutal 2 COVID years, these floods and a whole lot more, leadership is what Australians are desperate for. Still, it says something about both big party leaders that they've recently used 60-minute profiles to tell us about themselves rather than explain their record or give us a sense of their plans for our country and our future. From the opposition leader, we heard again about growing up in a sole parent family doing it tough. Now, fair enough. That was 40 plus years ago. Instead of his childhood years, Albanese's 25 years in the Parliament should be the real guide to Albanese the man and the would-be Prime Minister, only it isn't, because he's only ever really held the infrastructure portfolio and only then been a minister for 6 years out of the 26. From the PM, it was more of the daggy dad routine with Jenny and the kids, not the struggles and successes of his 4 years at the top. Now, I know this is a PM who doesn't want to weigh into the culture wars or the fight against the woke disease infecting our schools and our corporate life.
And if people want to talk about woke, and if they're woke enough or not woke enough, or they're too woke, or, who cares? I just want people in jobs and I want them healthy.
That's a big mistake. Voters care about values. They care about where our country is headed. And when the two major parties are so close on debt and big government spending programs, now even on climate change, values should be one area at least where there's a sharp divide between the left and the right. I wish, just like you, I suspect, that it was sharper than it is today. So far, the Labor leader has told us what he won't do. There'll be none of Bill Shorten's nasty taxes on retirees and investors, so he says. There'll be no Republican Labor's first term. There'll be no deviations from the coalition on border protection and acquiring nuclear submarines. For his part, the Liberal leader has told us that we'll have a much stronger defence force with extra nuclear submarines and an additional 18,000 military personnel, but not necessarily until 2040, almost 2 decades away, even though our peak strategic danger is right now in the next few years and not 2 decades off. It's as if Anthony Albanese is trying to reassure voters that he's not much different from Scott Morrison by me tooing most of Morrison's policies. Well, Kevin Rudd tried that, didn't he? He tried that against John Howard, and Australia only found out there was a big difference when it was too late. Right now, the Prime Minister is trying to persuade voters that there really is a big difference between him and Albanese, especially on economics and security, even though it's not immediately obvious what that difference is, other than the basic character differences between the two parties. Obviously, he's a staffer in the Howard years and the Abbott government. When it comes to judging Liberal and Labor, back then the policy differences were very stark. But for the life of me, I don't think you can win elections, certainly not win elections for a fourth term, by being vanilla versus vanilla. As I said, it's certainly not too late for the government to claw its way back from today's news poll. Don't write them off. I just think it would be more likely that they'll claw it back if the PM and his team would tell us exactly what they're hoping to achieve over the next 3 years, as well as over the next 2 decades. And that's going to involve taking some risks. The PM took a big risk when he committed Australia to nuclear-powered submarines. There was no guarantee then that Labor would support it, yet he went ahead, all credit to him, and produced what's probably the most important defence decision for our country in 40 years. That won't be enough. He needs more areas where he's prepared to create a real fight with Labor, areas like the national school curriculum, for one. Otherwise, this election isn't about Australia's future. It's just about their political futures. Which one wins, which one loses. Not what they might actually do for us and our country.